It's easy to become a Body Kindness Insider. Just visit bodykindnessbook.com and click Get Started on the homepage. Give your name and email and you'll get instant access to my free e-course. You're going to get a video about 5 health rules to break. I'm also going to give you a reflection and goals packet. You'll get a free chapter of my book, Body Kindness, if you don't have it already. And you're going to get one of my clients' favorite tools, and it's awareness building health and happiness journal that allows you to observe your day-to-day body kindness progress without counting calories, wearing trackers, and all those other things that just end up making you feel not good enough. Plus, you're going to get my tips and best inspirations over email. So if you're not yet a Body Kindness Insider, visit bodykindnessbook.com. Click Get Started, sign up. You can get going on your journey right away. And I will be sending you some check-in emails, including an invitation to our free Facebook group that is just for Body Kindness Insiders. I'll see you there. This week on the Body Kindness Podcast, we are continuing on with our theme in facing those body kindness barriers. And this week, it's all about the allure of dieting. And, you know, a lot of the shows we talk about have some type of anti-diet, don't do it type of a message. But yet it remains a very big barrier when it comes to practicing body kindness because diets are everywhere. I mean, they're everywhere we turn. We get some sort of promise that somehow life is going to be magically different and better. And it's just, you know, it's been normalized as this is the thing that you do in order to get healthier. This is the good thing to do. And while I love that more and more people are rejecting dieting, at the end of the day, it's still very difficult to do. So I wanted to bring in somebody who could really explain why dieting is so bad for your brain. So if you love your brains, you're going to hate dieting. And hopefully you're going to be inspired by the end of this show to keep going on your body kindness journey or get it started. And so I just want you to sit back and listen to this conversation where we talk about why dieting and the brain are never going to be best friends and things that you can do to finally let go of dieting and work with some self-compassion, some mindfulness stuff. And hopefully you'll have something to say when you hear that personal testimonial or where somebody challenges, why aren't you dieting? Hopefully you'll pick up some important research-based facts or pieces of information that you can share. And speaking of sharing, I would love it if you shared the Body Kindness Podcast with your friends, anyone who listens to podcasts or anyone you know who cares about creating a better life. I would very much appreciate you letting them know about the Body Kindness Podcast. Let them know that you're a listener. Tell them to subscribe and please leave a rating and review. I know that it's a lot to ask, but the next time you're in, if you could just think about clicking over on the album art and clicking into ratings and reviews. It means a lot to me. I read every single one of them. I use it for show feedback. And also, I'd love for you if you joined us on our very new Facebook group. It is free. It's for Body Kindness Podcast listeners. If you just go into Facebook and search Body Kindness Podcast, let's talk about that show. It will pop up for you. I've got a couple different pages there, but it'll be the podcast group that you're looking for. I'll see you there. Because real health is about being good to yourself. It's time for Body Kindness, the place where all bodies fit and weight is just a number. Hi, I'm Rebecca Scritchfield, author of the book Body Kindness, registered dietitian and nutritionist, and host of this podcast. My topic today is why diets are bad for your brain. This topic is important because so often we get lured back into diet culture. We think that surely there's some way we can fix whatever personal failure we have going on and finally succeed at dieting. But the reality is your important human brain is involved in this, and you need to know why it's at odds with dieting. My special guest to discuss this today is Sandra Ament. Sandra is the author of Why Diets Make Us Fat. The Unintended Consequences of Our Obsession with Weight Loss. She also co-authored 2 popular neuroscience books with Sam Wang. Welcome to Your Brain was named Young Adult Science Book of the Year by the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and it's been translated into 20 languages. Welcome to Your Child's Brain was published in 12 languages. She received a degree in biophysics from Johns Hopkins University and a doctorate in neuroscience from the University of Rochester. After 4 years of research at Yale University, she joined Nature Neuroscience, a leading scientific journal in the field of brain research, at its founding in 1998, and was editor-in-chief from 2003 to 2008, and she lives in Northern California. Sandra, thank you so much for coming on. I'm so excited to talk to you today.
Yeah, I am too.
Let's, before we dive in, let's let folks a little bit more in on what your current work is involved with and a little bit more about your background.
Well, you did a pretty good job of summing it up there. I work in all kinds of scientific communication. I use my PhD knowledge of neuroscience to help people write grants and papers. And then I also try to tell people who don't know anything about science what they need to know to live their best lives. And that's where my books come into things.
So specifically about the Why Diets Make Us Fat book, you talk about kids and your friend's kid dancing with an eating disorder. You dieted when you were younger. So it seems like this is a real personal passion for you. Is there something you can share with us about that?
I really felt like I needed to write this book. I've never had such an intense drive to do a book as I had for this one. And it's mostly because, what happened to me as learning to diet as a child and continuing to do it over and over and over and over again as an adult, because as an overachiever, I just kind of felt like having a perfect body was one of those things that was expected of you. And then seeing both the science of why that doesn't make any sense and also the damage that it does to people, my friends' kids, I just felt like I had the knowledge and therefore the mission to explain this to people. Mm-hmm. And so I went from just cornering people at parties to finally getting to write this book, which I'm really excited by.
Yeah, I mean, it's a wonderful, very important read. I appreciated it as a fellow scientist, right, with my bachelor's in chemistry and then the nutrition degree too, that it's very well researched and evidence-based. And there's that component, which you need. We need to have rational and empirical evidence. But then there's also personal story, right, that reads a little bit like a memoir would read. And that, so it kind of lets you blend the two, because so how I first heard about you was actually your TED Talk. And that just went crazy viral. How many downloads has that TED Talk had?
We're approaching 4 million now. I haven't checked it lately.
Oh gosh, I'd be like every day, click, click. I don't know how you hold it.
Well, I mean, it's been over a year since it came out. I assure you, I was checking it multiple times a day the first week.
Yeah. Oh my God. I mean, what an amazing opportunity and stage. How did that come about?
You won't believe this, but it actually was a deliberate decision on my part to try to do something to promote the idea so that somebody would ask me to write a book.
No, that's great.
I mean, that is crazy. It was the world's stupidest plan.
It worked out.
It worked. Yeah, you could say that for it. I'm not the kind of person who would ordinarily want to do a TED Talk. I'm an introvert. Public speaking isn't really my thing. But I have a good friend who's a neuroscientist who also turns out to be an advisor was at that time an advisor for the TED people on how to get credible neuroscience into their talks. And she asked me one day, did I know anybody who would be interested in giving a talk? And I did that thing that women supposedly don't do. I said, yeah, me.
I love it. And then they said, great. And then next thing you know, you're being coached and ushered onto a stage is the short version of it.
Pretty much. I worked hard on that talk, I'll tell you.
I mean, I did we literally, lovingly and jokingly called it teeny tiny TEDx. And I can't think of a more stressful thing. So to have that opportunity and to have so many views, it is very important. I remember when I saw it and have it waves through your circles of what you're paying attention to. And for me, it was like, oh, yes. Because of the neuroscience part of it in particular, there was like, you watch it and it's like, I trust this person. This is a PhD scientist who knows the brain. And so there's a sense of trust that people really need that you don't necessarily get from, I think people like me who work in like nutrition and fitness and stuff like that, that they don't necessarily want to believe what they hear, that the dieting is the problem. Because if the diet is the problem, then there's that fear that they may never get the kind of life they want because they think they need a certain body to achieve it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know very much what you mean. And one of the things I'm most proud of with my book, actually, is that I have not had a single expert come to me and say, look, you made a big mistake on the facts. I've had lots and lots of arguments with people who say, given these facts, I would do something else than what you recommend. But I've never had anybody come to me with a serious problem of fact. Reasonable people can disagree on what to do, but I think more and more people in the field who are real experts on this stuff are agreeing both that diets don't work very well for most people and that you can go a long way toward improving your health without worrying about your weight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And both of those messages, I mean, they need to be heard everywhere. Families, doctors' offices, schools, churches, written in the sky, because it is the exact opposite of what we're conditioned to believe. We're conditioned to believe that our body is the problem and that there's some type of salvation in changing our appearance. And even when the health card is played, we know that evidence doesn't hold up as well. But, it's about cracking the nut of the belief system of this is what is good in our culture and this is what is bad. And you can't do that without trustworthy and reliable information. It's not the only thing, but it needs to be there in order to make an argument for why we need to change our beliefs as a culture.
It's really hard to change people's beliefs. I mean, back in the stage where I talked about where I was just telling everybody I know any chance I could get about, why dieting was pointless and what they should do instead. When I first started out, I would just say, look, people who diet have a very high chance of gaining the weight back. They have a significant chance of gaining back even more than they lost. They almost never keep it off in the long run. And so you should just stop dieting. Mm-hmm. And inevitably, every single time that conversation happened, the person I was talking to, if they were a dieter, would say, but what do I do instead? And I would say, don't diet. I mean, why is that hard? Just don't diet. And they would say, but what do I do instead? Mm-hmm. And I would say, I don't care. Take up riding the unicycle. I mean, anything would be better.
Yeah. Anything would be better. I love that.
You can't actually change people's behavior with a negative message. Mm-hmm. And so by the time I did the TED Talk, by the time I wrote the book, I had spent years working out a fully formed answer to the question, what do I do instead? Mm-hmm. As a purely practical matter, because that was the only way it turned out to get people to listen.
Yeah. I often will have, I've heard this many, many times from clients, from friends, from Bernie Salazar. He actually was he's a friend of mine now. He was a former contestant on The Biggest Loser, season 5. He was actually, I'm doing air quotes, you can't see them, but he was the at-home winner of season 5. And what I hear is, well, the only frame I know for health is dieting, weight loss. Like that is what health is. So if you're telling me to do something different, I need to know, what the hell do you mean? Mm-hmm. Okay, well, there's so many good things I want to get to. Let's actually break it down, the issue of dieting and the brain, and they're basically not friends. So what are some simple ways that you can help people understand the important work their brain is doing and why it's never going to be in line with the structure of dieting?
So the first thing that people need to understand before any of the rest of this makes sense is that body weight is regulated by the brain. It doesn't just randomly go wherever you push it. So when people say, oh, well, you can bring your weight down if you just have enough willpower, that's actually exactly like telling somebody, oh, you can bring your blood sugar down if you just have enough willpower. There's a lot of stuff going on where there are all kinds of feedback loops in the brain whose only job, 24/7, 365, is to make sure that your weight stays within a range of about 10 or 15 pounds that your brain has decided is right for you. And your brain did not necessarily consult with your mother or your doctor or your culture in deciding what that range should be. But if you go outside of it, you are going to hear from your brain in some pretty powerful ways, with the aim of getting you back into your correct weight range, what your brain thinks is correct. That makes a lot more sense if you think about it as a long-term evolutionary strategy, because for most of human history, our biggest threat has not been gaining too much weight. Our biggest threat has been losing too much weight, starving to death, not getting enough food. And so all of these guardrails that exist in your body to push you toward maintaining the correct body weight for you are biased in the direction of preventing you from losing too much weight, because historically, in the long term, that's been really dangerous. We've only been maybe 100 years now in a place in history where gaining too much weight was even an option, let alone a threat. Much of the world still isn't. I mean, there are still people starving to death. This is the basic human condition that we have evolved systems to deal with. So what happens if you get too far below that range is that your brain increases hunger dramatically. It makes food actually more rewarding to you. And it also decreases the number of calories that your body burns. So you actually become more fuel efficient. You can do more exercise on fewer calories if you're below the range that your body thinks is right for you. And that would be great news if what you needed to do was walk 5 miles to the next berry patch to get some food. It's not such great news if what you're trying to do is go to the gym and work out to lose weight.
Yeah. I mean, you brought up so many really important key points. I think that every time I hear arguments about the food system and pick any number of food or sugar type documentaries. It's this message of there's an overabundance and you can't control yourself around this food. And, this thing is out there trying to kill you, like making you even more afraid. And we don't stop and think about that. I mean, we still have hunger, even in America today. I live in Washington, D.C., probably 5 miles from hungry and homeless kids, and you're right. Like that we have to understand that we are animals and that our brains have only evolved so much through the years, and they're set up to help us make sure we don't die. And then kind of add on to that the whole idea of like dieting and diet culture and where it came from. And I don't know, who knows, you can go back maybe deeper than this, but I know that it's often cited with just the invention and the patent of the bathroom scale. And like, okay, we're going to like market this hunk of metal and tell people this is what you need to monitor in order to know every day at home if you're healthy or not. That it was much more about sales and marketing, whether it's devices you need or the health halo processed and packaged food that you need to overfill as opposed to just enjoying moderation and everything like that. So we have to really notice that there's like conflicting goals and priorities going on that make it so that what we think is the very answer, that diet plan, is actually more likely to make things worse. So it's like taking a medicine that is guaranteed to not work, but you just, okay, thanks, take it anyway. It is a need to stop that vicious cycle. And I think that while we wait for years and years and do things to help change diet culture, we can still, as with ourselves, say, I want to learn and understand better how to work with my brain and take care of my body. And I'm glad you went over set point, because I feel like when I talk to people about it, it's kind of like, it's almost like they don't want to believe that's what happens. If they see one person, if they have one example of a success story, and I have to tell them, it's like, but you might be looking at the down cycle of a weight cycle and not necessarily a few years from now. And I know you talk about that in your book. So any sort of comments on that, the idea that it's cyclical, and that if your brain is doing its job, you're likely to weigh more, or you could weigh more after your diet than before you even started.
Yeah, let me start by just saying that I really, at some level, hate being put in the position of having to tell people that it's their responsibility to come up with an individual solution to what is basically a structural problem with the food system. Mm-hmm. That is not right. And I think we need to just say up front that this should not even be your problem in the first place.
Yeah. And you're meaning things like there are policy decisions that influence food prices and food deserts, kind of like all those socioeconomic status. There's all these things that impact our availability and access to food that we shouldn't be having to deal with.
Right. Okay. There are lots and lots of people in positions of power who could be making better decisions about promoting the health of the people that they govern. Mm-hmm. And we would not be worrying nearly so much about these issues if they were doing a good job with that. So taking that as our basis, then to go back to say, there are some things that individuals can do. Mm-hmm. And it starts, as you say, with understanding what it is that actually happens when you go on a diet. And the first thing to say about that is that there are more than a dozen studies that have followed people in the long term after they've gone on a diet. And without exception, every single one of them has found that somewhere between 1 and 4 years later, people end up heavier on average than they were when they started the diet. That is what the research shows. And you can give me all the testimonials and all the individual anecdotes you want. But every single time that a researcher has started with a group of people going on a diet and followed them out for years, those people have not ended up thinner. A small minority of them end up thinner. A larger minority of them end up fatter. And most of them end up right back where they started.
Mm-hmm. Which is almost what we would expect from the human condition, right?
Which is exactly what we would expect from a regulated system that has stronger controls against weight loss than against weight gain.
Mm-hmm. Period.
Anybody who wants to tell me that diets are the correct solution needs to grapple with those findings. You are prescribing an intervention that has been shown over and over again to be not just ineffective, but to actually make worse the problem that it is purporting to solve.
Yeah. Let me ask you about this, like the whole, because I could hear someone hearing that and say, okay, so then like it's just eat clean, or maybe I should do something like Whole30, which I don't know, just for listeners, with the Whole30, I believe you cut out dairy or certain potatoes, there's actually
almost everything.
Truly wholesome foods that you cut out. But you get what I'm saying is it's just like, well, this isn't a diet but there's still a restriction of types of foods that actually can provide nourishment. But then also the idea of if you say you're taking out ice cream, which is something that you used to enjoy, you end up missing it and want it more. And if you let yourself have it, you can tend to eat it less mindfully, overeat it, feel guilty about it. Can you kind of help people understand why it's not necessarily all calorie restriction, is it?
A lot of people now have sort of taken on board the idea that quote unquote diets don't work. But then they try to slip in the idea that, oh, yes, but you can lose weight without dieting in a variety of ways. In fact, it was actually a problem with marketing my book, that there is this genre out there now that people know about of books that proudly proclaim on their covers that they're not diet books, but turn out to be secretly diet books when you get to chapter 8 or somewhere. And we struggled to differentiate my book from those books. But that's not the right lesson to take from the idea that diets don't work. The correct lesson to take, I would phrase like this: losing weight on purpose doesn't work. In whatever sneaky way you want to try, a big part of the problem is simply that willpower is exhaustible, as we all know from personal experience, and the brain's regulatory systems are working all the time. They never get tired. They never take a day off. They can afford to sit there and just wait until such time as you've had a long, hard day and the kids are yelling and your ability to quote unquote resist temptation is at a low ebb. And what tends to happen to people who are currently on a diet or who have an extensive history of dieting at those moments is that they find that they don't have any other guardrails in place against eating the entire half gallon of ice cream or the whole bag of cookies or the whole bag of chips or whatever your personal weakness is. That if you have managed to systematically take all of the joy out of eating and replace it with guilt and shame, then when you do find yourself eating something that is a quote unquote bad food, there's often this tendency to just think, oh, well, I'm just a bad person, and so nothing matters. Let's just eat the whole thing. Whereas a person who has a healthier relationship to food would say, oh man, I have had a really bad day. I'm going to eat some ice cream and I'm going to enjoy it. And having enjoyed it, then actually feels better and doesn't get into this whole spiraling down cycle of, I hate myself and I'm going to do something that's going to make my body and my mind feel really terrible because I have committed the sin of eating ice cream.
Yeah, no, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I mean, it was my own personal experience that there were rules that I needed to follow if I wanted to look like the people I was reading about in the magazines or even my friends, nobody ever told me actually that genetics was a thing, and not only a thing, but like a thing that has more of an impact on your weight and shape than your habits, which I don't like to admit as a dietitian, someone who helps people with habits, that, because I want people to be motivated to take positive action in their lives. But I also want them to understand that a lot of it is a footprint that has been determined, like you were saying early on. And in your book, you went into the twin studies that basically said even if identical twins are raised separately, they're likely to weigh the same and under different conditions, right? Different schools, different upbringings, different access to food.
Yeah, that's right. So I think the easiest way to think about genetics is that it creates a set of possibilities, not a single possibility. So somebody with a certain set of genes may have the potential to be somewhere between, the high end of normal and the overweight range as dictated by the medical industry, which we can come back to. I'm sure you know that those ranges are not set in an entirely evidence-based way.
You mean the BMI? Mm-hmm. The BS membership or membership. I'd like to cancel my membership to the BMI.
I would surely like to have the doctors get a little more sensible what they say to people about weight.
Yeah. Well, what do you mean by that? Let's elaborate. Because I know I have listeners who have been avoiding going to the doctor because they've had past negative experiences and they just don't want to deal with the judgment. And that's certainly worse for their health than anything, even if they do have a behavior that they would like to fix. Not going to see your doctor is worse.
Yeah. And in fact, there are studies that indicate that people who are heavier are less likely to go to the doctor because they worry, realistically, in most cases, that they're going to be shamed for their weight. And that means that basically the medical establishment is, with the best of intentions in some cases, making people's health worse by increasing their stress and making them less likely to receive good health care. On both ends, because people are less likely to go to the doctor, and because when they do go to the doctor, in a lot of cases, they don't get treatment for their actual problems because they instead get told that they need to lose weight. I mean, there's a story in my book of a woman who went to the doctor with a sprained ankle and was told that she needed to lose weight.
Yeah, that's weight bias. I mean, did they at least look at the ankle, x-ray, anything?
Nope.
Yeah.
He just said, well, of course your ankle hurts. You need to lose weight. And she said, but I stepped off a curb last night in my high-heeled shoes and twisted my ankle. I think it might be broken. And he said, well, you need to lose weight.
God.
It's just crazy.
It is. It is. I've shared on an earlier podcast, but I can't help myself. I once had a client who was at the OB, a brand new OB appointment. And it's like, you're already, in that paper gown, feet in the stirrups. Like, I can't think, maybe actual childbirth is a step elevated. And, the doctor leaves to let you get dressed again. And on the way out, not anywhere where she could confront, on the way out, as she's door is open and she's quickly closing it, says, "I hope to see less of you next year." And the client was just mortified. And she's like, she actually had a history of binge eating, which was resolved. And she's like, that would have sent me through a tailspin. But I knew to come talk to you about it, figure out what we're going to do and everything like that. She ended up leaving and writing the practice a letter explaining why in a as professional way as you can, but just a very direct, and then told her referring primary care physician what happened too. And, you need to take action to advocate for yourself if you're not getting good medical care, but we shouldn't even have to do these things is the worst of it.
Yep. Those of us who can need to do it on behalf of the people who aren't in a position to, but boy, it's an extra burden that you shouldn't have to bear.
Yeah. That's why we often say in Health at Every Size about how difficult the work is, and at the same time, worthwhile and important work, even when it is difficult. And I'm so grateful to have your book because it is. And I could see the difficulty with the marketing. And I mean, I'm sure when you get interviewed and you're, and this happens to me all the time where it's like, I mean, they never fact check anymore, but there's going to be this context of they'll keep pushing and pushing and pushing just because they want to write some sort of line about, and then this will cause weight loss. And it's an uphill battle. But the reality of it is you have a good, science-based, credible book that says dieting is actually bad for you. And I definitely got the message of you're not a better person when you lose weight. I definitely got this message of how can you, kind of here's all the scientific reasons for why you may see weight fluctuations, but that there are specific actions you can take, even if you don't lose a pound, that would be associated with improvements to health. And that's unheard of. So it is a very important work to have out there, and just keep knocking on doors and keep on doing that type of work. I want to get into the connections, and you talk about this in your book, the connections between sleep and stress in the brain. I just think this is an issue so many people who are trying to practice body kindness struggle with, because I could say whatever, pull out my airplane oxygen mask and be like, you need sleep. You can't do it all. And it's almost like that falls flat. Like they get it, but they don't want to take the practical steps of protecting their sleep. And it's, even though it's their lack of sleep is likely to be associated with increased stress and poorer health, they're not wanting to directly address the sleep. And I'd love to get the neuroscience perspective on these intersections between sleep, stress, and whether it's weight directly or eating behaviors that could impact weight, or anything at all that you would want to talk about there.
My absolute favorite review of my book on Amazon says something, it's a negative review, and it says something to the effect of, oh, she's just giving all the stupid health advice everybody gives, eat your vegetables, get enough sleep, lower your stress, blah, blah, blah. There's a reason we're all giving the same advice.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's right. And it turns out there is no magic pill to make you healthy, but there are some basic things that you can do that really matter. And the connection between lost sleep and stress is one of the key points that, the majority of people right now don't get enough sleep. We've all managed to convince ourselves that being crazy busy is so critically important to the world that if these papers don't get shuffled and that phone call doesn't get made, then, civilization is going to collapse or something. But in fact, it's especially acute for kids that not getting enough sleep is a very strong predictor of poor health and weight gain in adulthood. But for anybody, lack of sleep increases your vulnerability to stress, and having chronic biological stress going on in your body is really, really bad for your health. It's so much better to just get the basic things right and, do all those boring things that Mom said, because, no amount of willpower is going to compensate for flooding your body with cortisol all the time.
And what's the point of cortisol?
Cortisol is great if you're being chased by a lion or a burglar. It's designed around an acute, life-threatening crisis that is going to resolve pretty soon one way or the other. Either you're going to get away from the lion or you're going to die. There's really no in between. So what cortisol does is it mobilizes all your resources for a big last stand. You put nutrients into your muscles, you remove them from long-term sort of processes like digestion that may be important eventually but don't matter right in this moment of crisis. And it prepares your body physiologically to fight or run. And to do either one of those things effectively, it basically shuts down all the growth processes and all the basic maintenance stuff that for 4 hours or 40 minutes or 4 minutes or whatever the short-term crisis is, those things don't matter. But over the long term, chronic exposure to stress hormones does a lot of damage to your body, makes you more at risk of problems like from heart attacks to diabetes, all the sort of lifestyle-associated problems with health. And it also damages your brain. It damages your brain's ability to function in ways that can be permanent if it's sufficiently long-lasting.
Mm-hmm. People don't hear that enough, that like this is damages your brain, like brain damage, like something that we generally would say, no, we don't want that. But, we tend to downplay, I just want to lose like 5, it's like it can really have severe consequences.
Yeah. And in fact, people have measured increased stress hormones in dieters. Dieting is physiologically stressful.
So diets are stressful and the brain fights them. It's going to fight back basically and try to. So basically it works like this. You decide that you're going to try something to try to manipulate your body. And even if in the short term, right, it quote works. So you see some weight loss or maybe you feel better because all of a sudden you were cooking more at home or something like that. But if you do things that you can't sustain the rest of your life that aren't about you making positive self-care decisions, you run the risk of going outside of your set point, plus not building a habit, and your brain sends this feedback, right, of that you said it makes food more palatable, you have an increased drive to eat it, completely out of your control, like you can't turn this off. And the whole act of dieting is stressful and can lead to damages in your brain. Anything else?
I think that's plenty.
Well, I have to bring up my favorite quote of yours from the book. And it was talking about sources of stress. And you used the term social subordination. And you said, people are the champions of making others of their species miserable. And I was like, oh, I had the audiobook. I had to stop what I was doing, rewind it and hit clip to make sure I got that. It's so powerful and so true. So what did you mean by that? And what do you hope readers take away from that idea that people are the champions of making others of their species miserable?
So anybody who wants to know a lot more about that topic should go read Robert Sapolsky's book, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, which expands at great length on what stress does and doesn't mean for health and how we get stress and what we can do about it. And he's the one who's done some of the research on how various primates enforce their dominance hierarchies and what that means biologically for the subordinate animals. But the basic idea is that when people get very focused, because we're such a social species, right? This is kind of the dark side of being social animals, is that everybody's all up in your business. They've all got ideas about what you should and shouldn't be doing with your life. And some of those ideas are wrong, as we've been discussing, and some of them are things you can't do anything about, like, what social group you were born into or what gender you are. There are lots of things that people get picked on for that they can't do anything about. And it's really stressful to be in a position where other people are acting superior to you or discriminating against you or even just making comments about it. One of the women I interviewed for my book gained weight very abruptly from a series of medical problems that she had no control over. And the thing she said to me that really, the quote that really stuck with me the most from our discussion was, "The bigger you get, the more invisible you are." She was talking about trying to get service at a fancy department store that she had been to many times when she was thinner and being ignored by the clerk. And that's a basic example of how social hierarchies get enforced in ways that are sometimes subtle and sometimes not very subtle at all.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I remember reading about workplace discrimination. I believe the stat is that people in large bodies are basically competence and intelligence is judged based on weight in the workplace. And that for women, it could start at a size 14 and 67% of American women are a size 14 or higher. And so it's like when you represent what our culture is saying is somehow not good, how are you supposed to have what you need to survive and thrive in that kind of culture?
Yeah, it puts a lot of burdens on people to take care of themselves. And as you emphasize a lot, I think one of the most effective ways of taking care of yourself in a situation where you're under social stress of some type is by banding together with other people in your group to form a support network.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Where you're spending more of your time with people who can say to you, yes, this is a normal human condition and we're just fine, thanks. And less time with people who say, oh, that's wrong and you shouldn't be the way you are.
Right. Then you pick up more of that message of that that there is something wrong with me or that I am wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I mean, I certainly agree 100% with doing what you can to create the kind of environment that is going to be likely to help lift you up, and try to avoid isolation island where you say, I don't want to bother them with this problem, or, maybe I shouldn't bring this up because it becomes even more stressful. I do want to transition to, because, we're running short on time, but I would like to ask you one more question if we can, that has to do with your brain and mindfulness and mindful eating. And I never, and we talked earlier about you don't say do this and then you'll lose weight. But it's like, if we're not dieting, one of the things that we could be doing is awareness and paying attention. So why is mindful eating so aligned with how the brain, prefers to work, and so that we could use that as our guideposts instead of the food rules?
So I mentioned earlier that the problem with willpower is that it's not on the job all the time, whereas your brain's food regulation systems are. We can take advantage of that by moving away from a diet-based mentality where we're supposed to use our willpower or our reasoning skills to try to control food intake and into a mindful eating frame where we eat in response to hunger and stop in response to fullness. Because hunger and fullness are controlled by parts of the brain that are on the job all the time and that work mostly in an unconscious way. So instead of giving all your attention to the difficult job of trying to control what you eat, what you do is you use mindfulness to improve your awareness of hunger and your responsiveness to hunger, which requires a commitment to actually allow yourself to eat when you are hungry. But it turns out that people who eat when they're hungry are also more likely to stop when they're full. And people who deny themselves food when they're hungry are much more likely to overeat when the opportunity arises. So moving into a mindful eating approach really helps us to free up our willpower to do other things. And almost all of us have aspects of our lives that are more important than our bodies, than our appearance, than what size clothes we buy. You can free up your willpower to be able to use it to be a better parent, a better partner, more successful in your career. There are lots and lots of applications of willpower that I personally think are a lot more important to the quality of our world than whether you can still fit into your pants from college. But also because this mindful eating doesn't require the constant application of willpower, it can become, and for most of us who take this seriously, does become sort of a background process that doesn't require full attention in the long term, so that not only are you aligned better with what your body really wants, but you're also not stressing out about how to get there. You can be much more relaxed and have basically a friendly relationship with food, which is the biggest change to my own quality of life since I stopped dieting. That was something of a surprise to me.
It was like all of a sudden it's no big deal.
Yeah, it's like, why did I worry about this so much?
I know. Sometimes I have to try not to get angry about my past. That's like I will always say it's part of what made me who I am today and what I do. But it's like you feel like this missed. What did I miss out on because I was so stuck in diet mind and with the diet culture and just overthinking every little thing. And I'm so glad you brought up this point, because when people are not as far as long as you are, right, when you're at the party saying, hey, don't diet, and they ask about that, what to do, there is a lack of trust of what comes next. And there's this lack of a sense of ease. And it does get easier. There are things that we're still in diet culture, and there are things that I can do with relatively ease that if I was obsessed over dieting and food rules would be much, much harder. So while it might sound unhelpful, like, I don't know, it just gets easier, that it's to hopefully have some sort of trust in that you've got to go through the process in order to experience this result of comfort and ease and trust and no big deal around food.
Yeah. I tell people, give it a year, see what happens. You can always go back to where you are now if you want to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, we are out of time, and I really enjoyed our conversation today. I'm definitely going to have your TED Talk and the link to get your book in the show notes. So where else can people connect with you? Where else are you on social media or a website where you'd like to share with folks?
So I'm on Twitter at Sandra_Amit. And I also have a website that's www.sandraamit.com. People can find me either place.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming on and chatting with me today.
Oh, thanks for having me. That was fun.
And that's our show. Thank you so much for listening. I would love if you could take a minute and leave a rating and review on iTunes. I know they don't make it very easy, so I have a few quick tips for you. First, launch the Apple Podcast app, and then you're going to click the search button to enter the name Body Kindness, and you'll find my podcast. You'll see the album art. And when you click on the album art, there is going to be a button in the middle at the top. It's called Reviews. Click that. And then when you scroll to the bottom, you will see an option to leave a review. And so you'll click that button and go ahead and write your thoughts. I also would love ideas for future episodes. You can email me, Rebecca@bodykindnessbook.com. Again, that's Rebecca@bodykindnessbook.com. I love chatting about the show and how it's helpful. And so keep those emails coming. And also, if you're not yet completed with the e-course, don't forget that's a free resource for anyone who's interested in practicing body kindness. If you visit bodykindnessbook.com and click on Get Started, just enter in your name and email and you'll get instant access. I'll see you there.